Yesterday, the powers that be released some of the January 6th surveillance footage. What made this significant is that the federal prosecutors had fought tooth and nail to keep it under wraps, of course. Per their assertion to the judge, it would endanger national security for Americans to see what really happened in regards to the breach of the Capitol building. How's it going, folks? Hope y'all are doing well. Once again, I'm going to apologize in advance for my voice. I haven't been able to shed this pesky cold. Now let's get back into it. Of course, in reality, their vigorous opposition to the video's release was more likely about how embarrassing it was to their prosecutorial narrative and the January 6th narrative at large that we see and saw in the media night and day, hour after hour, minute after minute. Let's take a quick commercial break to pay some bills. Friends, I'm going to point out the obvious. It seems like big government and big tech are trying to destroy America. Everything they touch turns into a disaster. Pretty soon the whole system will fall apart, and the first thing to fall will be the food supply chain. So, do you have enough emergency food to get through a serious long-term crisis where you can't get food at the grocery store? Most people don't, and they'll panic when the time comes. That is why the smart move now is to get long-term storage emergency food before things go bad. I highly recommend My Patriot Supply. They've served millions of American families and have over 41,000 4-star and 5-star reviews. Their mission is your survival, and right now you can save 25% on a 4-week kit of emergency food that will save the day, probably soon. Order a starter kit for each member of your family and they'll ship everything quickly and discreetly to your door. Go to preparewithresurgence.com so you can claim your 4-week emergency food kit and save 25% in the process. That's preparewithresurgence.com or hit that link in the description box. As I've explained, ever since that day, there was no real violent rush. There was a few isolated incidents at best, at least in comparison to the disgusting violence we all witnessed over the previous year in major cities. Rather, men in black and some in blue with badges opened up doors and people strolled in, mingling, taking selfies, and generally appearing to pose no real threat. Now, of course, I can't show you the damn video here, but let's think back to all the carnage and devastation we watched take place in American cities before January 6th. Let's remember how the idiots running the propaganda networks couldn't help but show the destruction, even as they were telling us it was all peaceful protest. I guess after years, or decades really, of poisoning all of humanity with panic porn through nightly news, child trapped in the bottom of a well, and where is Kaylee Anthony hourly updates, they just couldn't help but show the carnage, even though it flew in the face of their collective peaceful protest argument. Anyways, my point being, how does a media so addicted to destruction, to drive views mind you, not show all that same devastation that went on in our capital on that ever so tragic day? Maybe because there wasn't any to show in the first place. Maybe because the people that entered the building actually respected the building and what it represented. Maybe they were there only to express disgust in the way the system was being corrupted, that very system that made that building and this country so great. So let me tell you what you're not going to see in the fresh footage. You're not going to see an organized insurrection ready to murder congressional members and seize control of our government. What you're going to see, though, is black-clad men who open the doors in what looked like a very, very organized, planned-out fashion. Now, as Tucker Carlson pointed out last night, it's rather convenient that 500 plus people have been arrested, but that we don't know who those particular men are. Let's watch the clip and I'll see you on the other side.
We're living through distorted history as we watch the offense of January 6th described by everyone. Here's how the media described what happened that day.
That day will be another day that lives in infamy in American history, similar to Pearl Harbor and 9/11.
We can now add January 6th, 2021, to that very short list of dates in American history that will live forever in infamy.
The worst attack on our democracy since the Civil War. 150 days since the worst single act of political violence since the Civil War.
The worst attack on American democracy, arguably, probably since the Civil War.
The greatest attempted insurrection since the Civil War.
The 1/6 attacks are likely to kill a lot more Americans than were killed on the 9/11 attacks.
Though there was less loss of life on January 6th, January 6th was worse than 9/11.
For the record, we really try our hardest not to put liars, people we know who lie for a living, on television because it's irresponsible. Other channels do it every day. But because we're literal, let's go through the evidence here. Only one person was killed on January 6th, and that person was an unarmed female protester who was shot in the neck without warning by a Capitol Hill police officer who happens to have a publicly documented history of extreme recklessness. The protesters, meanwhile, killed no one. And yet they're telling you that those protesters were worse than the Imperial Japanese Army that attacked Pearl Harbor, killed thousands of Americans, and led to the Second World War, the biggest war in history. They're also, by the way, worse than Al-Qaeda. So as a talking point, as a political talking point, that seems a little, how do you say, over the top. Actually kind of insane. But no, it's apt. Everybody argued that what we saw on January 6th was exactly like 9/11, Pearl Harbor, the Civil War, including a guy who writes popular histories for airport bookstores. He assured us that historically speaking, those comparisons are entirely valid. Here's that historian on NBC.
Think of the 6th of January if those terrorists who committed that attack on our Capitol had been a little bit faster. They could have and probably would have executed the vice president, executed the Speaker of the House, executed other members and leaders of Congress.
They probably would have. Therefore, they were as bad as people who actually did. Now, you look at that and you say, well, that guy's stupid, and that's fair, by the way. But then you look at 15 other guys just like him saying exactly the same thing, and you have to ask yourself, why are they all saying exactly the same thing? Maybe there's a purpose here. And that might lead you to ask, what actually happened? And how can we find out? How can we make up our minds for ourselves? It's clearly a significant day in American history. It's being used to change the country. So maybe we should get to the actual facts of that day. What are they? Well, it turns out the Biden administration didn't want to tell us what they were. They refused to release thousands of hours of surveillance footage taken from within the Capitol on January 6th. Why wouldn't they want us to see that? Well, we're not sure, but we know they really didn't want us to see it. In fact, they went to court to keep that footage under seal. In one court document, the Department of Justice argued that releasing that footage from January 6th would, and we're quoting here, compromise the security of the United States Capitol and those who work there. They went on to say that that footage might, quote, create a visual pathway where other bad actors could use in planning their breach point and pathway for future attacks. No word if ISIS-K was involved in those plans, or even if ISIS-K in fact exists. But that's not the point. The point is they can't let you see the video because it's just too dangerous to American national security. Keep in mind, the Capitol is a public building, which technically speaking you own. You've probably been inside because until the other day you were allowed to because it's your country, or was. So the idea that you're not allowed to see the inside of the Capitol is insane. The idea that the public has a clear interest in knowing what happened that day is real. So the footage we've seen up to this point, shot by journalists and citizens, contradicted the official storyline. Here, for example, is the Chewbacca guy wandering around the Senate. This is the dangerous terrorist. This is the Al-Qaeda operative. This is the Tojo of January 6th. Wandering around the Senate chamber looking a lot more like a confused street performer than a dangerous terrorist.
Hey, man. Glad to see you guys. You guys are patriots. Look at this guy. He's got covered in blood. God bless you.
Yes.
You good, sir? Do you need medical attention?
I'm good, thank you.
All right.
I got shot in the face.
Where are they?
I got shot in the face with some kind of plastic bullet.
Any chance I could get you guys to leave the Senate wing?
We will. I've been making sure they ain't disrespecting the place.
Okay, just want to let you guys know this is like the sacredest place.
I know.
So you look at the guy in the Viking horns, the Chewbacca guy, and you may reach the obvious conclusion maybe psilocybin mushrooms aren't good for you. And that's fair. But no honest person could look at that video and decide America is under attack from terrorists. So then you have to ask, is that what the rest of the so-called insurrection looked like? Well, now we have an answer because a federal judge just rejected the Biden administration's strenuous attempts to hide the surveillance footage from January 6th. So footage was just released. It was obtained by BuzzFeed. It covers 15 minutes on January 6th from 2:25 p.m. to 2:40 p.m. Eastern. And those were key moments in the so-called insurrection. Now, right now, you're seeing images from a surveillance camera positioned at the entrance to the Senate wing of the Capitol. You don't see people hiding bombs or using bayonets or firing weapons, trying to take over the country in an insurrection. You see people walking around and taking pictures. They don't look like terrorists, they look like tourists. And all of them, by the way, are Americans. The rest of the footage, including shots from surveillance cameras outside the crypt at the Capitol, is similar to this. You can look it all up, by the way. It's online right now. And you should, because you will notice that contrary to what the Department of Justice, we're going to have to start putting air quotes around that, contrary to what DOJ claimed, none of the footage shows a secret route into the Capitol. Oh, that ISIS-K could use. So why did they keep this from us? Well, here's one theory. You could compare the footage that was released today with what Democrats showed us during the impeachment hearings earlier this year. Take a look at this. It is surveillance footage showing a squad of people dressed in all black systematically entering the Capitol and kicking open one of the exterior doors on the Senate side. These people appear to be well-trained and coordinated. They're not high on hallucinogenic mushrooms. The question is, who are they? And why don't we know their names? And why aren't they dressed like any of the other people in the footage that was just released? Remember, we were attacked for saying this, but we've already been vindicated for it. We still don't know how many federal agents were involved in the events that day on January 6th, but we have very good reason to believe from court documents that it's a significant number. And here's one clue. At a recent rally in Washington, the feds managed to arrest one of their own undercover agents. There were so many feds at the event that they lost track of each other and arrested one of them. So we ask once again, how many federal agents were there on January 6th? Why can't we know? What is clear is that once again, this footage reveals that history was a total lie, an intentional distortion, a mirage created to control you. It was the work of a specific political party. It was the work of the Democratic Party.
Now, Tucker really hits the nail on the head here, and it's nice to see any of this situation critiqued and debated or challenged on national television. It's just too damn bad it's 8 months late. You see, we know damn well who random grandmas were that took selfies, but we are to believe that the feds just have no idea who the men are who opened the actual doors. Why were they not dressed like everyone else? Why do they seem to know exactly where to go and what to do? Why were they not stopped by the people already inside the Capitol, who I assume are the very woke United States Capitol Police officers, otherwise known as Nancy Pelosi's little bitch boys? Now, when the doors are opened, the people walking in almost seem surprised and confused. There was clearly no grand plan here by insurrectionists. Rather, it certainly looked like those who opened the doors were separate from the protest. And while the narrative for a long time on the right was that these were Antifa operatives, it was always the wrong assumption, at least in my humble opinion. It always made much more sense that the men in black were federal agents, FBI or otherwise. Remember, this is the same FBI that essentially orchestrated the Gretchen Whitmer kidnapping attempt. This is the very same FBI that had more agents at last week's Justice for January 6th rally than there were actual protesters. Further, if those aren't federal agents in the video, then why hide that fact and fight so hard to keep the video that showed them under wraps? Why not just reveal who they are? The government could clear this up in basically an instant. After all, they can track down random people across the country who stole a beer from Nancy Pelosi's office, but we are to believe they just don't know who those men are. Okay, whatever. We'll see how this pans out in the midterms. Better get to work pumping out those mail-in ballots, Democrats. You're gonna need them.
Discouraging what we are seeing, the president is encouraging what we are seeing. Just as he has in a much more over way, over and over and over again, with his tweets. Completely irresponsible, and this is the result of that. Unfortunately, as unusual and as terrifying and as surprising as what we are seeing is going on, in a lot of ways, it is one of the least surprising things. What is remarkable is that this kind of thing hasn't happened earlier, because that these protesters, who of course have the right to protest, but this is beyond that. As John said, this is basically taking over, storming the Capitol. It's anarchy. It really is anarchy. And the president has encouraged this time and time again, and they are stopping the constitutional, peaceful transfer of power.
Some of this came by way of redstate.com. If you liked it, hit that like button. Subscribe if you haven't. Leave a comment down below. There's a PayPal link in the description box, so please put $1 in the bucket on the way out the door. I'd like to thank everyone for all your donations. They're much needed and much appreciated. Now, with all that being said, we'll see you next time.
Come on, move. Move. Easy, easy.
So it turns out the vast majority of people inside the Capitol on January 6th were peaceful. They were not